We get together. It's this gewaltige Kiddush Hashem of this Yarchei Kala, this prolonged Limud HaTorah, which we're all the Megalgo and Schusay Yedei Zakai, Yedidi boys. We're going to Shlomo Gadisman that is keeping this going, and it's a gewaltige schus for all of us. And this Kesher of Torah, Lo Yinotek, and we're just going to talk on this Indian of what we just this last week or two, this Hilchos Shabbos, melacha צריכה legufo, and I'd like to come from a little bit of a different angle, lechedude, a little bit popule araisa. Yesterday happens to be the yahrzeit, was the yahrzeit of great Rebbe, the Yismach Moshe. Well, they say over the Yismach Moshe, he used to have tremendous amount of tears and crying and feelers by the Hishanis. One of the years by the Hishanis, in the middle of the Hishanis, before, when he used to usually give these Musardik and very Hisayrus droshes, instead he said a shtickle Torah on Mesechtes Baba Kama in Meruba. After, by the next Hishana, he continued and he said tremendous amount of Musar and Chassidus and Hisayrus. After the Hishanis, they asked him, why did he choose to say the Hishanis, that shtickle Torah on Meruba and Mesechtes Baba Kama? Said he felt a disconnection with the Eibishter and that feelers weren't going in. Oh, you know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Chadi B'Pulpulei Oraisa. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it feels Kaviyachol happy and B'Simcha and enjoys Pulpulei Oraisa. So just like when you meet a person, you have to break the ice and warm up this atmosphere to have the conversation. So too, the Yismach Moshe felt he had to break through to the Eibishter, so he did it with a shtickle Torah, Pulpulei Araisa, on Mesechtes Baba Kama. So let's a little bit try to do this Chadi Pulpulei Araisa on the Indian of melacha צריכה legufo. We know one of the most famous Gemaras, and we're all familiar with it from Halacha L'Maisa, is when a Yontif falls on Shabbos, either Sukkot or Rosh Hashanah, we don't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and we don't take the lulav on Sukkot that falls out on Shabbos. And the Gemara Mesechtes Sukkot Daf Mem Gimel and Rosh Hashanah Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, the Gemara tells us that the reason was a gewaldike, one of the most powerful Hakonas Chachomim Amar Rabba, that the reason we don't do it is Shema Yitleno Biyodoi V'Yelech Eitzel Boki Lilmoid, and he'll go to ask a question, V'Yavirenu Arba Amois B'Rishus Harabim, V'Hainu Taima D'Shofar. And that's the same reason for Shofar and Megillah, because Shema Yavirenu Dalet Amos B'Rishus Harabim. Tosfos in Mesechtes Sukkot Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph poses a question: why would the Gemara say Yavirenu Arba Amos B'Rishus Harabim? The simpler thing would be he picks it up in his house and he goes out to the Rishus Harabim to go to the Rav's house to ask him the question. So the first act that happens is Hoitzah Merishus HaYochid to Rishus Harabim. Why does the Gemara say that the Gzeira is of the secondary reason, which is Shema Yavirenu Dalet Amos Berishus Harabim? That happens subsequent to when he leaves the house. So Tosfos therefore asks the question, Motzi Lemeimar V'Yetzienu Merishus HaYochid L'Rishus Harabim. So Tosfos gives a hard teretz and the two terutzim, and then he says, "B'tam Rishon Nira, Inami Merishus HaYochid L'Sharabim Islu Akera Aleka LaMigzar." Tosfos has terutzim to try to answer why the Gemara said Rabbi said his reason is Shema Yavirenu Dalet Amos B'Rishus Harabim. Whatever the reason is, does state in the Gemara. The Gemara for some reason chose the time of Shema Yavirenu Dalet Amos B'Rishus Harabim and avoided saying the time of Shema Yotzienu Merishus HaYochid L'Rishus Harabim. It's interesting to note that the Rambam in Perik Beis Hilchos Shofar Halacha Vav, the Rambam brings this halacha that when Rosh Hashanah falls on when the Yontif of Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, Ein Toikim B'Shofar B'Chol Makom. Af al pi, there's no problem with the Tkiya, it's only a Shvus. Umin Adin Oyesh Toikim, and you should have been Doicha. V'lo Mein Toikim. So the Rambam explains, Gzeira Shema Yitleno B'Yodoi, V'Yoilichenu L'Mi Sheyitkiloi V'Yavirenu Arba Amos B'Rishus Harabim. oy moitzi oy mirishus l'rishus. The Rambam does say the reason. He obviously is maitik the Gemara, that the Gemara says arba amas b'shus harabim, but the Rambam says no. It's also part of the Gzeira is moitziu mirishus harabim mirishus hayochid l'rishus harabim. So the Rambam is almost asking a kasha on the Gemara, and the Rambam is underlining Taisus' Ha'ara. Why didn't the Gemara say that reason? So the Rambam had to be honest to the Gemara. He says that, but he says that the real reason would also be Moitzienu Merishus HaYochid L'Rishus HaRabim. The question is, the Rambam might be right, but Taisus is also right. The Gemara didn't say it, so there must have been a reason the Gemara didn't say it. So why would the Rambam find it important and be smarter than the Gemara to say the reason of Yoitzienu Merishus HaYochid L'Rishus HaRabim if for some reason the Gemara did not say it? So that's our question, and the question would be why the Rambam adds the reason and seemingly must have had a reason that the Gemara didn't say it, and the Rambam found it fit to say that the reason is Yoitzienu Merishus HaRabim L'Rishus HaYochid. I'm going to say it first with a little bit start with a Gemara that's a little bit of a side Gemara. The Gemara tells us in Masechtes Baba Basra Daf Kuf Yutes Amid Aleph, and the Gemara tells us the Makaishish Eitzim. The Gemara talks about it there, and the Gemara wants to bring out that the Makaishish Eitzim, we all know the Makaishish Eitzim in Parsha Shalach, went out. And others say he was Salafchat, and he went out. The Gemara says, the Gemara tells us, in honoring terms, mentions the Avera of the Makaishish Eitzim. And in Parsha Shlach, the Torah tells us that the Makaishish Eitzim was Makaishish Eitzim b'yoyim Shabbos. And in order that he was Makaishish Eitzim, so then Moshe Rabbeinu put him into confinement, and then later HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Megal to Moshe Rabbeinu that he's Chayiv Misa. However, the Gemara seems to be talking about the Makaishish in honoring terms and doesn't seem to be talking about him as a Bal Avera. So Taisus explains and says that there was a rationale to the Makaishish and was called Shabbos in order to prove the point that he's Chayiv Misa. So in order to prove the point that he's Chayiv Misa, he did this act. Taisus says, therefore, the Makaishish Eitzim is talked about in honored terms and not in derogatory terms, because his Chil Shabbos was done from a good-hearted place, and it was L'Shem Shamayim. Fragt the Mar Shoah, a gewaltige Kasche. Fragt the Mar Shoah, why would that be honoring and something to say that the Makaishish was L'Shem Shamayim? We all know that the halach is in Shas. A person is not allowed to be over an Avera L'Shem Shamayim. No one cannot say the ends do not justify the means. So therefore, even though the Makaishish Eitzim would have in some way and had really had a good intention, but good intentions are not what we do. We're people of the halacha, and the halacha is that you have to keep Shabbos and not make your own cheshbonos and your own ways of thinking this would be better. That's too much of a slippery slope. So therefore, flake the Marshoah, it shouldn't be l'shem shamayim. Zok the Marshoah, a chidish gadol b'noira. And we're going to prove that some other Rishonim, in a certain way, also hold like the Marshoah. Zok the Marshoah, that the Makaishish Eitzim was in essence a melacha she'ein צריכה legufo. We know we have a machlokes in the Gemara. Reb Shimon holds melacha she'ein צריכה legufo is potter, and Reb Yehuda holds melacha she'ein צריכה legufo is chayiv. Now, what do we usually understand the rule? Zok the Marshoah. So therefore, over here the Makaishish Eitzim didn't want these Eitzim. He only wanted to cut the Eitzim and collect them to prove a point to Klal Yisrael that he's Chayiv Misa. And therefore, he would be Chayiv Misa. He wanted to take upon himself to be Chayiv Misa. The only reason he did it, but his rationale was to prove a point. Zok the Marshoah, he held like Reb Shimon, and therefore melacha she'ein צריכה לגופו would be potter, and therefore he was not really actually being mechalel Shabbos because he was doing a melacha she'ein צריכה לגופו. This marsha is really very, very hard to understand. What is the usual way we understand melacha she'ein צריכה לגופo? Let's take the primary example that the Gemara tells us. The Gemara tells us that when someone digs a hole in the ground and he wants to ditch, that's his intention. That's a melacha she'tzricha legufo. Because the melacha of digging a hole is boina. You're constructing a ditch in the ground. That's all good if that's your intention. So the melacha is constructive because you want that ditch in the ground. So the ditch in the ground is now the outcome of the melacha. And therefore, according to everybody, that's a melacha she'tzricha legufo. But if your intention was not to make a ditch in the ground, your intention was to take earth out of the ground because you need the earth somewhere else. So if you need the earth somewhere else, that means, and it happens to be that there's a ditch in the ground, and now I have a binyan. But that wasn't my melacha. My melacha was to have earth to use somewhere else. That would not be sufficient. That's not a melacha she'tzricha legufa, because the guf of the melacha is boina. If that's what you want, then it's melacha she'tzricha legufa. If what you want is the earth, and it happens to be, it comes out a ditch in the ground, that's melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. Another example is like we all learned this whole last couple of weeks. If someone puts out a fire, kibui is one of the lamites malachas. However, if someone makes a kibui and he just wants the fire out because he doesn't want light in the room, that's true. He was machaber. He extinguished the flame. But that's not tzricha legufa. That's not constructive in the kibui. That's just, you don't want the light on. A constructive kibui would be if there's a piece of wood burning and I put it out because I want a coal and I need coals. That the kibui is constructive. So that's called melacha she'tzricha legufa. But if all I need is for the light to be out, that's melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. What's the pshat in the marsha? The Mekoshish Eitzim wanted the wood. He wanted the wood in order to show Klal Yisrael. He wanted to collect wood. You know why he wanted to collect wood? He wanted to collect wood because he wanted to show Klal Yisrael that collecting wood is not good, and doing a melacha on Shabbos is a chiyuv. How in the world is that melacha she'ein tzricha legufa? What's the pshat in the marsha? How could the marsha learn that that's called melacha she'ein tzricha legufa? He went out with an intention to collect wood, and he wants wood. So why does he want the wood? He wants the wood in order to prove a point, but he wants the wood. How is that comparable when he wants the wood, when he wants the earth for earth? Here he wants the wood. What's the pshat in the marsha that would be called a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa? In order to explain this marsha, I put in the Maramakamis, I got all the Marik. And this Marik is quoted by the Avnei Nezer in his Hagdoma to the Eglei Tal. And in order to explain it in a very, very strong way, I'm going to say over a story, and not any semblance of halacha l'maaseh, but just to underline the fact. A few years ago, here in Brooklyn, there was somebody who was walking home a little late from shul Friday night, and he was crossing over King's Highway. It's a big street there in Brooklyn. And he was crossing over the street. There was very few cars, very, very few cars. It was late at night, and he crossed against the light. So he didn't have a walk sign, and he crossed over King's Highway against the light. Suddenly, a police car put a siren on and came up close to him and told him, please stand right there. He came out, And the police officer said to him, you just jaywalked across the street of King's Highway. So the person, he didn't even know that that law still exists, that you could be ticketed for jaywalking. He said, okay, I didn't even know, I was ignorant of that law, and I crossed over the street. The police officer said, okay, I have to issue you a ticket. Please give me your ID. He said, I'm a Shabbos observer, so I don't have my ID. So the police officer said, so I'm writing out a ticket, tell me your name, and sign on the line and affirm that this is who you are. So the person said, I can't sign, I'm a Shabbos observer. So the police officer said, so forget it then, I'm putting you into the car, and we're gonna take you and hold you overnight in the pen. Person got very, very scared, and he didn't know what to do. He was going back and forth in his mind. He didn't want to go in a car. The police officer was becoming belligerent a little. So he took out the pen and he scribbled his name on the ticket, and that was the end of the story. Later there was a whole tumult. Should the police officer have done it? Should he have not done it? The person was a younger man. It was an El Chayid. Afterwards, he was conflicted. Was he supposed to do that? Was he allowed to do that? Or was he not allowed to do it? Was he allowed to scribble his name or not? And I met this person, and he came to speak to me, and I told him, I want to compare this to the Shailas V'Tshuvas Maharik. The Maharik quotes a Gemara in Masechtas Yevamis. The Gemara is in Masechtas Yevamis, Daf Kuf Chof Aleph Amid Beis. Now the Gemara is really talking about something else, but the Maharik proves from the Gemara that if there's a non-Jew standing with a stick and he tells you, I'm going to beat you up unless you're Mechalel Shabbos, the halacha is you're allowed to be Mechalel Shabbos. It might only be an Issa D'Rabban. Let's say it would be a case where your life is not in danger. The non-Jew says, I'll be hitting you to a point where you're going to be injured, but you are not going to be killed. You know that that's the case. This person is not going to kill you, but he's being Mitzayer you. And he says, I will be Mitzayer you, I will give you pain and hit you unless you're Mechalel Shabbos. Zog the Maharik in Kol HaTorah Kula. If the non-Jew would be doing that to tell you to eat chazer, you would have to take the hitting and not eat the chazer. Because pikuach nefesh is a very strong thing, and you don't have to give up your life for chazer. But here it's only pain and suffering. Pain and suffering, it's not so easy to be Jewish. So therefore, you have to take the hit and not eat the chazer. So the Maharik. So the Maharik says that when you're cooking the food because the non-Jew is telling you to cook the food, that's all Allah to cook the food. I don't need the food. I don't need this melacha. I only am cooking the food in order not to get hit and not to be put into pain and suffering by the non-Jew. So the Maharik, therefore by Shabbos, there wouldn't be an Isser of Shabbos, because it would be a melacha she'en צריכה לגופו. And therefore, the Gemara would hold, and that's how we learn of the Gemara in Yevamis, that the Gemara would hold that would not be a bona fide Mechlechas Shabbos, because Shabbos would be an exception to the rule, and Shabbos would be the halacha that it would be a melacha she'en צריכה לגופו. Therefore, the Avnei Nezer in the Hagdama to the Eglei Tal says that a sakonas aver is mutter to be Mechalel Shabbos in order to be a sakonas aver, because you're not doing the Chilul Shabbos because you need the Chilul Shabbos. You're doing the Chilul Shabbos in order to save your aver. So it's more than a regular case. So it'll be a kula in Hilchos Shabbos, that if a non-Jew tells you to be Mechalel Shabbos, so therefore the halacha would be that you're allowed to be Mechalel Shabbos midaraisa according to Reb Shimon, because it would be a halacha of melacha she'en צריכה לגופו. The gewaltige chiddush, the melacha she'en צריכה legufo pashut is I don't need this. What the outcome? Here I do need the outcome, but since I need the outcome for somebody else or for another reason, that not for the reason of the outcome, that remains a melacha shein צריכה לגופו. That's exactly the Marsha. What was the Mekoshish Eitzim thinking about? The Mekoshish Eitzim was thinking that he's collecting wood. He really, in truth, wants to collect the wood. He wants to collect the wood, and he wants the wood. You know why he wants the wood? To prove the point that Chil Shabbos is Chayiv Misa. And therefore, in truth, you know what the Mekoshish was saying? When they were giving him Asra, he was saying, I want the wood, I want the wood. But the only thing is, in his mind, he knew he doesn't really need the wood. He needs the wood to prove the point. Zok the Marsha, similarly to the Marik. Therefore, that's a halacha of melacha shein צריכה לגופו. When you're doing it for another motive, then the halacha would be that's a melacha shein צריכה לגופo. Just comes out parenthetically a gewaltige chiddush. Moshe Rabbeinu, with the tzivui of Hashem, gave the Mekoshish Misa because that's what they saw. He didn't tell them his whole plan. When he came up to Shemayim, they greeted him as a parade because they said, oh, he was L'Shem Shemayim. That's what the Marsha means. So the Mekoshish Eitzim in his own heart knew that he was a L'Shem Shemayim. And it's not an Avera L'Shem Shemayim is Doicha, because it was L'Shem Shemayim. Therefore, it wasn't a regular halacha of Chilul Shabbos, because there was the component of what he knew that he was doing it for an ulterior motive. Therefore, according to the Marshal, the feet away, we're explaining it with the Marik, that would be the halacha of melacha shein צריכה לגופו, and therefore it would be midaraisa potter, and that was the l'shem shamayim. So we see this Marik and the Marshal have a completely new understanding, a new level of understanding melacha shein צריכה לגופo. If a person is doing a melacha, not even though he needs the outcome, but he needs the outcome because somebody else is compelling him to do that outcome. And I'm not doing it because I need the outcome, even though I need the outcome in order not to get hit or in order to prove a point. That does not reach the level, according to Reb Shimon, of melacha shetzricha legufo. That's a gewaldige chiddush ledin of that would be that halach. The Gemara tells us in the
before you go fighter, there's a shaila here from one of the shtatfim. The Rambam, as we learned earlier, Pasuk like of Yehuda.
Oh, we're getting there.
You're getting to the Rambam? Okay.
I'm getting to the Rambam. So I just want to go back to that case of the person who signed the paper. So I told the person who signed the paper, and this is a very slippery slope, and therefore I don't want to say it halacha, but just as a lumdus point, as an explanatory point. I said, you were signing the paper that the policeman should not put you in jail. That signing of the document, according to Reb Shimon, would have been malach. Maybe signing it according to Reb Shimon. So I want to pacify the person. He shouldn't feel so guilty, and therefore it might have been an option of what he did as the correct option. It's just interesting to note that we'll say that at the end of this year. We'll get back to the Mekoshish Eitz. So Koponim, that would be the understanding of the Marik. So I just want to say that the Gemara Masechtas Shabbos Daf Kuf Vav Amud Aleph, the Gemara tells us in Masechtas Shabbos Daf Kuf Vav Amud Aleph that there's usually a halacha of mekalkel, and mekalkel is potter. In order to be chayiv on Shabbos, you need to be a masakin, not a mekalkel. And the Gemara tells us a mekalkel, there's an exception to the rule, is mekalkel b'chabura. And if a chabura is, even if it's a mekalkel, and the Gemara says, even if it's a melacha she'en צריכה לגופו. So if someone makes a chabura, this classic case of a chabura is bruising an animal or a person, and you're over the isser of netilas neshama. But usually It's a melacha she'en צריכה לגופו. I get angry and I hit somebody. So that's very nice. I hit him, so some blood came out. That blood is really unnecessary. That's not צריכה לגופו. The product of the melacha would be the blood. So the Gemara says the only case where you would really have a case where it's constructive would be if tzarech l'damai, to give l'kalbai. Somehow a very outlandish case. But the Gemara says, no. This is an exception to the rule of melacha tzricha legufa, and it's an exception to the rule of melacha of mekalkel. So the Gemara, why? Because the Torah tells us a special gzeirus hakosu that you could make milah on Shabbos. Those of us who are holding along with the Daf Hayemi, spent the last week. So milah is deiche Shabbos because there's a gzeirus hakosu by Yom Hashmini. Yimol tsar lo so yafilu b'Shabbos. So the Gemara tells us afilu b'Shabbos. Absent that limud, it would be usher to make a milah. So the Gemara, I don't need the blood by the milah. I just need to make the milah to get the arl off. So why would that be chabura? What would the malacha be of doing milah? So the Gemara, we see that chabura is an exception to the rule. Even though you don't need the blood, you don't need the product, it would still be usher. And therefore the halacha would be that it would be a malacha she'eina tzricha legufo. Just it's a special chiddush that by chabura malacha she'eina tzricha legufo is chayiv. Freik the Rashba, ribaynu the kol al mekula, ein lecha tzricha legufo misakin gadol mizeh. You're doing what Hashem wants you to do. Hashem says, make this chabura. So you're doing it, and you have the outcome. You have the outcome because it's a mitzvah, and you need the blood. It should be a melacha shetzricha legufa for the mitzvah itself. And the Rashba answers, the opposite is true. Because it's a mitzvah, that makes it into a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. Because it's a mitzvah, and I'm doing it because of the mitzvah, therefore the halacha would be, it would always be a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. If anything, the Rashba explains, doing something for a mitzvah makes it worse. So all the achrayim ask on the Rashba, how can a mitzvah make it worse? The mitzvah, if anything, should make it more legufa. I am looking to do it because of the mitzvah. If I'm looking to do it for the mitzvah, so I'm doing the what I'm supposed to do. So that makes it, that should give it more of a power to be a malacha. What's the hezber of the Rashba? So the great Goin, Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish, the Lemberger Rav, or a Sefer Beis Yitzchak, it's Gewaldike Pilpulim, and it was one of the Gedolei HaPoiskim, and in the early 20th century, the end of the 19th century, Zokta in Galicia, Zokta Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish. Nein, this is exactly like the Marik, but you have to listen very carefully. Zokta Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkish in the Beis Yitzchak, and it sounds outlandish, but if you think about it, it's gewaldik. If a non-Jew is standing with a stick and he's telling you, be Mechalel Shabbos, what did the Marik and the Marsha hold? They held that when he's standing with the stick and telling you to do it, when you do that Chilul Shabbos, it's Eina Tzricha Legufa. Why is it Eina Tzricha Legufa? You know why it's Eina Tzricha Legufa? Because you don't need this malacha. You're doing it because you're being compelled to do it. So since you're compelled to do it, your rotzin is not the outcome, even though you need the outcome. You need the outcome because you're compelled to do it. If you're compelled to do it, you need the outcome. That is Eina Tzricha Legufa. And according to Reb Shimon, you would be potter. Zokta Beis Yitzchak, what is it telling you to do the milah? You know what? The Eibishter is Kaviyachal standing with a stick and telling you, do the milah. So when you're being compelled to do it, even though you need the outcome, that would in turn create a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa. Because the reason it's eina tzricha legufa is, if a goy is forcing you to do it, that's eina tzricha legufa. If the melech malchei hamalachim is forcing you to do it, so that's also compelled. And that's also forced. And therefore, that's an Eine Tzricha Legufa. And since it's an Eine Tzricha Legufa, so therefore, that's the Pshat in the Rashba. The Rashba holds that anything that you do because of a mitzvah would be comparable to the Marik. And just like the Marik holds when you're forced to do it, or if you have to do something because in order to avoid something else, like the Marsha, and you have another ulterior, you have an ulterior motive, that would create a situation of Eine Tzricha Legufa. So every mitzvah in turn would really be an Eine Tzricha Legufa. And therefore that's the pshat in the Rashba. So it'll come out doing for a mitzvah would in and of itself be Eine Tzricha Legufa. Gewaltig in the Welt. A gewaltige Chiddush that comes out from the Beis Yitzchak, and it's brought in other Achrayim, that similar svara, that there would be a svara that every time would be comparable to what we said from the Marik and from the Marsha by Mekoshish and the Hagdama to the Degleital from the Avnei Nezer, would be the same svara, would it be by a mitzvah. Im Kain, I just want to go back. Im Kain, everything's turned on its head. Why can't you take a lulav on Shabbos? Because you might take the lulav and ask your Rav how to take the lulav. Why are you going to the Rav to take the lulav? Why? Because of peer pressure? No. The reason is taking the Rav to the lulav is an Al-Chayid. The Eibush is telling him, take a lulav on the first day of Sukkot. So even if he does, let's say there would be no Gzeira of Shema Yavirenu. So there would be a mitzvah to take the lulav. Why is he carrying the lulav? He's carrying the lulav because he's looking and he feels the compelling pressure, so to speak, of being Makayim the mitzvah of lulav. If he has to be Makayim the mitzvah, that would in turn be a melacha shein צריכה לגופו. If that would be a melacha shein צריכה לגופo, in worst case scenario, it's only an issa d'Rabbanan, because a melacha shein צריכה לגופo according to Reb Shimon. So therefore the halacha would be, he wouldn't be over. Why in the world would the Chachamim, according to the Rashba, according to the Havana of the Rashba from the Beis Yitzchak, that's built on the, we're saying is built on the Marik and the Marsha, in gain, why would there be Gzeira Shema Yavirenu? Even if he did something wrong, there would really be nothing wrong. And the reason it would be nothing wrong, because its underlying factor is the mitzvah. So therefore it would be a malach shein tzricha legufo. So what's pshat in the whole din of Shema Yavirenu? L'chayra tzarich loymar. That the halacha is, we all learned it in the beginning of the Daf Hayom Masechta Shabbos. All the Lamed Tes malachas are learned from the Mishnah. The Gemara tells us, except one. One of the malachas are not learned from the Mishkan. Maver Daled Amos B'Shus HaRav. Because they were never Maver Daled Amos. So the Gemara tells them Perek HaZayrik, and the Gemara is also on that Taisus brings it on that Beizom and Aleph, the bottom Taisus, Masechta Shabbos, that Daled Amos is Hilchos. Daled Amos stands by itself. It's halacha l'maishes. Where do we learn the halacha melacha shein tzricha legufo as partner? According to Reb Shimon. Because in the Mishkan, everything was melacha tzricha legufo. Everything was constructive. So since we did it, it was constructive. So therefore, the Hilchos Shabbos mirrors the Mishkan, and therefore you have to do it how? With a melacha tzricha legufo. So therefore, melacha shein tzricha legufo is partner. Daled Amos is not learned from Daled Amos B'Shus HaRabim, because Maver Daled Amos B'Shus HaRabim is not learned from the Mishkan. Maver Daled Amos B'Shus HaRabim is learned from where? Is learned from Hilchos HaGemir. Imkein, it's gewaldig in the Welt. The emes it would be mutter midoraisa to take the lulav, to ask the Rav, because it would be malach shein tzricha legufo. You know why it's the Gzeira? Shema Yavirenu Daled Amos B'Shus HaRabim. Because Daled Amos B'Shus HaRabim, even though it's a malach shein tzricha legufo, like the Rashba, with the Hesber of the Beis Yitzchak, according to the Marik and the Marsha, but Daled Amos B'Shus HaRabim would be also. And therefore, the Chazal said, oh, Shema Yavirenu Daled Amos B'Shus HaRabim. so therefore you're not allowed to do it. Oh, that's why it's Xera. Im Kain would be Miyushav Taisus Kash. When do we say Hilchos Gemira? That's only by Dalet Amis Bershus HaRabim. Merishus L'Rishus, the Ferish Gemaras on the Tzadik Vav, Tzadik Zay, Sechli Shabbos. That was in the Mishkan when they used to hand the kroshim from the outside to the inside. Machmes, Umevi, Umoitzi, Merishus HaYochid, Rishus Ram, Rishus Ram, Rishus HaYochid. That is a din from the Mishkan. So from the Rishus HaRam to the Rishus HaYochid, the halacha would be Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo is potter according to Reb Shimon. Dalet Amos is Aser. Why? Dalet Amos is Aser Midaraisa. Why? Because Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo is Chayiv, because it's not learned out from the Mishkan. Oh, then it's very good. It answers Taisus Kasha. Why does the Gemara specifically pick Shema Yavi Rano Dalet Amos? And the Gemara does not note the din of Moitzi Mershus HaYochid Lushus HaRabim, because Moitzi Mershus HaYochid Lushus HaRabim would not apply, because it would be a Melacha Shein צריכה לגופו. So Mele, it wouldn't apply. The only thing that where it does apply is the halacha of Maver Dalet Amos Mershus HaRabim. So it's Gebaldik, the answer to this discussion. Anytime someone's compelled to do it by a non-Jew, is Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo. Just like the Maharsha says, the Makaisha Shein. Just like the Avnei Nezer in the Hagdama says, Ta'atzolas Eifen. Im Kain, he said that the Beis Yitzchak says, that's the pshat in the Rashba, when someone is forced to do something, so therefore he's forced by the mitzvah. So if he's forced by the mitzvah, that's Melacha Shein Tzricha, that's a Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo. In Kain, that's why a mitzvah is Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo. We need a special riboy. It's a Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo. We see that Chabura is Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo is Chayiv. Neila Zog the Gemara. So we said that then the Gemara is fair. Why do you have any Shema? Well, how is there Xer Shema Yavi Ran Dalam Shvasarabim? My compelling reason and my underlying reason is the mitzvah. If that's the mitzvah, it should always be a Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo according to Reb Shimon. Al Kol Choch the halacha is only by Dalet Amos, like Rabbi Nachum Zempa says in Tzos Chaim Siman Aleph, that Dalet Amos Bershus HaRabim is Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo is Chayiv because Hilchos Gemira law, it's not learned out from the Mishkan. In Kain, that's the halacha. That's why you be Chayiv. In Kain, now we come back. So as someone mentioned, the Rambam Paskins Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo, according to most readings of the Rambam, Paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. That Rabbi Yehuda holds Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo is Chayiv. So that means the Rambam could have learned the Gemara. That Rabbah in the Gemara is going Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo is potter. And the reason he said Shema Yavi Reno Dalet Amos is because he needed to contrive and turn it into a situation where Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo would be Chayiv. Where did he find that by Dalet Amos? According to the Rambam, that's unnecessary. Why, according to the Rambam, is that unnecessary? Because according to the Rambam, Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo is Chayiv. The Rambam does not have that reason to say B'dafka Shema Yavi Reno Dalet Amos. And we use it for tzirufim, like was spoken out in many of the shiurim, and when it comes to grammars and it comes to different things, that was saimach on the shita of Reb Shimon. So Reb Shimon would be, Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo would be potter. So that's why maybe according to that psak, and that's what the Marik is going in the case of Yark Val Yavar and Pikuach Nefesh, you could be saimach on the halacha of Reb Shimon, and therefore would be Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo would be potter. But the Rambam, who steadfastly holds Melacha Shein Tzricha Legufo is Chayiv, so therefore the Rambam would learn that we would learn that way. I'll just finish with these two very sharp inyanim that come out from here. It's just interesting. There's a Xeris HaKosav in the Torah that Kibbut Ava Aim is not Doiche Shabbos. So that means if Kibbut Ava Aim would be Doiche Shabbos, if a father would tell you, I want you to cook for me, so you say you would have to cook for him. Kamash Malon, Ish Imoy Baviv Tiro, Ves Shapsai Sait Ishmairo. That Shabbos overrides the din of Chil Shabbos. And therefore the halacha is, you have to keep Shabbos and not do Kibbut Ava Aim. Atava Vicha Chayovim B'Kvaid. Even the father is included in Hilchos Shabbos. So therefore he can't force you to be machal Shabbos. Really, according to what we said, why can't we have our cake and eat it too? If a father is telling you to do it, and the rule would be kibud av is doiche Shabbos, why would that be different than the marik's melacha shein צריכה לגופו? So according to Reb Shimon, so when a father forces you to do something, when a father tells you to do something, so now you're being told by your father. That should be, even if you don't hold to the Beis Yitzchak's Chiddush. Let's say you don't hold to the Beis Yitzchak's Chiddush, that a mitzvah compels you. But here there's a person compelling you. Why is your father worse than the non-Jew of the base of the Marik? And why is it different than the Marshah? You're doing it for another reason. So therefore, the whole halacha shouldn't apply. So where's their Chilul Shabbos? I found this kasha later on in the tshuva of the Beis Yitzchak. He notes this question and he remains with a tzarach chiyun. I thought maybe Kibbud Av is an exception to the rule. You know, there was once a story with Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanta came into shul and he saw somebody going over to a poor person and he says, Hareini muchen mezuman lekaya mitzvahs tzedakah, and he gave him tzedakah. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanta turned to the Yid after and he called him over, the giver, and he said in Yiddish to him, Mach nicht von der Oreman dein Esrig. Don't turn this distraught poor person into your esrig and you're going to shuckle with him. When the Torah said to give him tzedakah, you're not supposed to be making a big announcement and belittling him and saying, oh, you're my ani, so I can give tzedakah. The way the Eibishter wants you to give tzedakah is the Eibishter wants you to give tzedakah. You're my friend. I feel like giving it to you. I would give it to you even if you weren't poor, because I feel I empathize with you. And if you'd be my friend, I would give it to you. That was what Rabbi Yisrael Salanta said. Kibbud Av Ein would not be a mitzvah to say, oh, you're my father, so you're doing it. I really wouldn't do it. I'm doing it because you're telling me to do it. No. The mitzvah of Kibbud Av Ein is to relate to your father, to feel with your father. Therefore, that would be an exception to the rule of the Marik, and therefore, by Kibbud Av Ein, it would be a Chilul Shabbos, and would not be a Melacha shein צריכה לגופו. It's just also interesting to note. There's a famous tshuva from Rav Meir Arik in Imre Yesha, that Rav Meir Arik, the Gewaldige Goyin, the Meir Arik said to us, says that he brings kama v'kama rayas, that Yosef, Shevet Yosef, it's not for now, Shevet Yosef always held Melacha shein צריכה לגופו is Melacha shein צריכה לגופo is Potter. And he says, therefore, the Mekoshish was from Shevet Yosef, but I'm not going to have enough time. I'll just finish off with one other thing. It's very interesting. In Masechta Shabbos Perek Kol Kisv, the Gemara tells us there was once a person sitting at his table on Shabbos, and suddenly somebody came running in, and he told him, Reb Yid, the fence on your field fell down, and there are animals getting ready to come in and eat up all the produce on your field. The person was sitting at his table on Shabbos, and he was ready to get up because he would go up and fix the fence. And then he guarded himself, and he said, I'm an Erel Chiyid, I'm not going to get up. And he didn't get up. Gemara tells us that miraculously, that on that spot where the fence fell and the animals came in and completely decimated his field, one slav tree, a slav chad, caper fruit tree grew there, and it was mefanes mishpacha for dairoi v'dairoi. So it steht in the Gemara in the Shabbos Perek Kol Kisv. So it's slav chad grew there, and that's where it was mefanes mishpacha. The Shaloh HaKotzer says, why a slav chad? He says it's a remez to tzalof chad. That tzalof chad, this yid was some sort of a descendant or a Gilgal, whatever it may be, of Tzlavchad, and that's Merum is here. So once wanted to say Pshat. Why Epis Tzlavchad? Because it's very good. What did Tzlavchad, the Makaishish ate? Tzlavchad was the Makaishish. What did he do? He did a melacha she'ena צריכה לגופו. Everybody didn't know this Lamda Shecheshet. And they thought that the reason he did it was why? To be Machal Shabbos. His act was an act of Chilul Shabbos. But what was in his heart? In heart and Klape Shema Yagalyo, it was a Malacha She'ena Tzricha Legufo. And according to Reb Shimon, he was part of it. His act was wrong. The Chetzonius, the outward of his act was wrong, and the inward was Kodesh V'Tohar. That was the L'Shem Shamayim. What did this Yid do? This Yid had a bad thought. He was going to go fix the fence. But what did he do? He didn't do. His Chetzonius overcame his Pneumius. And he did the correct thing, even though he thought about doing the wrong thing. That was the tikkun for Tzalachad. That was the tikkun on the Melacha She'ena Tzricha Legufo of his ancestor, Tzalachad. In Cain, that's the Tzlavchad. A Yid has to be a synthesis of both what he thinks in his heart and what he does b'chetzonius. And when they both come together, we have that great Kedusha, which is called the Nefesh HaYehudi, the Gewaldige Nefesh HaYehudi, which comes out, the Ramah says in Hilchos HaShayotzar, Umafli Lasois, Dr. Ramah, Mafli Lasois is the synthesis of the Neshama and the Guf. The Machzah Shekel says there on that halach of the Ramah, Ki lo yal alechem levado yichya adam, ki al moitze pi Hashem yichya adam. He brings from the Arizal, and every time a person eats, his guf becomes nizoin, and his neshama becomes nizoin. And that's a mafli, that's a pella. That a yid has this koyach to synthesize and put together and join, and to make this connection and understanding that it's not just about guf, it's about neshama, which is mazing the guf, which is mazing the neshama. So this koyach ha-Torah, this mafli la'asais, this gewaldike kesher that we all have, we should keep going, and the Torah should be making a matzel. We should only hear ach toiv v'chesed. We should be zoichem et Hashem tepsuras toivos. Yeshua is